We have one item on the agenda, source of income discrimination ordinance. Chip?
Thank you, Council President Prince and council members. Chip Vincent from CED, joined by Paul Hintz from CED as well. And today what we'd like to do is to advance a discussion with you concerning source of income discrimination. Actually, this has been, Paul and I were reflecting on the way up here tonight. We've had a long conversation about source of income discrimination over the last year since the City Council adopted the Section 8 protections almost a year ago now, and then subsequently removed the sunset date provisions for that. As part of that, we were looking at what additions should we add to Section 8 for source of income discrimination. And we had a pretty good reading from the council back at our committee of the whole meeting back in February in terms of where you wanted to pick in terms of a path moving forward. But as soon as you think we know exactly what we're doing, the state legislature actually adopted state law regarding source of income discrimination under House Bill 2578. And so then it became incumbent on us, Paul, to do an evaluation and analysis of what we had drafted to advance to the council for source of income discrimination based on several meetings we'd had at the Committee of the Whole and the new state law that's going to go into effect this June. And what we found was there was a number of differences between the laws, and to the extent that you want to get into those specifics, I'm going to defer that part to Paul. But what I wanted to share with you, after we went through a lot of discussion and looking at the range of alternatives that were advanced in the memo we shared with you last week, is that from just a practical standpoint, what made the most sense and what we're advancing in the administration to the council is to adopt in city ordinance the same as state law was adopted this last year, with the knowledge and the understanding that we have the police power and the code enforcement authority to actually implement that. When we did the analysis, what we saw is the major weakness in the state law is it requires that there's civil action taken by the tenant, and they have to go through the full legal process for any kind of penalties or compensation. Where ours, we use our police power under code enforcement where we can, after the third violation, we can go right to criminal action against the landlord. So we have much more stringent criteria to ensure enforcement of those that the state did not have. Secondly, it made sense to us that we didn't want to add a lot of confusion to this issue. If you can imagine, if you had one set of state laws over here and one in the city, each with different enforcement mechanisms, that just creates a lot of confusion, not just for landlords, but for the tenants too. So what we thought was the best way to do it was to provide the protections provided by the state, but layer it with the code enforcement authority for the city. So we're using the state rules. The rules are the same, whether you're in the city or anywhere in the state. The rules are exactly the same, but we do have our code enforcement authority. So in our minds, that was the cleanest way to deal with the issue, to really be the most effective. But there are nuances and differences between the proposals as they came out, and we can speak to those if you would like. But I just wanted to share with you our thought process and part of our evaluation.
Any questions from council?
No, not this time.
All right, so I have got a committee report. Wow, are we really? Are we really? Okay, I've got a committee report here. The committee of the whole recommends concurrence with staff recommendation that council amend Renton's existing source of income discrimination SOID ordinance to eliminate contradicting provisions and adopt the same SOID protections as House Bill 2578, while retaining the city's options for enforcement, e.g. civil penalties / criminal prosecution. The committee further recommends the ordinance regarding this matter be prepared for first reading. Any issues with me signing this?
I just have a couple questions.
Go ahead, please.
Not about, I agree with signing it, but what are the sources of income that are in the state law?
Sure. So when last the council was briefed in February, we were considering an ordinance that would grant protections to any source of income that is verifiable and legal. So where the states is a little bit more particular in that these have to be benefits, subsidies, retirement programs, or other programs administered by any federal, state, local, or nonprofit entity. So one example that would be covered under ours, and is at least the previously drafted ordinance and the states, would be child support, because that's a court order and therefore it's not a program of any of these institutions.
Yeah, I think another good example of the difference between the two, and this is something that the council had a lot of deliberation on, and that was the fact that the council did not want to see protections extended as source of income if, for instance, under unemployment, if the benefit period was less than the lease period.
Yeah.
So that was an example of something that we were building into the city ordinance, but the state did not go that way.
Ms. Witchy?
That was my question, so I was going to bring up that exact
I had
thing.
a feeling that's what you were going to bring up.
Yes.
So in the state law, unemployment,
Is protected. If it's shorter than the lease period, it is a protection under the state law.
Mr. McIrvin, then Ms. Perez, and then Mr. Corman.
So I guess a question as well as a comment then. The other difference in the state, though, is it has the mitigation account created, so non-payment could be reimbursed to that landlord should they lose if someone ran out of unemployment. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's not nullified in any way by ours.
Right, right. So that protection becomes less necessary
Sure.
under the state law because there is a way that landlords could get reimbursed.
Ms. Perez?
No,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
already.
Mr. Corman?
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, if, let's see, in our deliberations, we talked about how when a landlord accepts Section 8, that they can still have, criteria, credit criteria, that still applies. So landlord can still screen tenants.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think one of the details we got into was, that perhaps a fair way to do that is to, if a landlord had a requirement, say that, that the tenant earned 3 times the rent, I think we were saying, well, a fair way to administer that might be to deduct the Section 8 voucher against the rent. So if the rent starts out at $1,200 and the voucher is $800, you could say the rent is now $400, and to make sure that the tenant made 3 times that portion. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct. Ours is modeled after Seattle's, which would deduct any subsidy or program that has a direct agreement between the landlord and that entity providing that subsidy, that be reduced from the overall rent, and then any other program that doesn't have that direct agreement between the landlord and that entity providing the subsidy or program, that didn't just be deducted from or added to their total income.
So their total income.
So the math is the same, really. It's
Okay.
just, it made people more comfortable with the idea that there's a direct agreement with this entity providing the
Yes.
subsidy and the landlord.
Okay,
Just-
and so that remains a best practice under the state as well,
Correct.
that the landlords would take, and I appreciate that distinction. So those federal and state programs that actually give money directly to the landlord, those would be subtracted from the rent before making that calculation, and the other programs are treated as their income.
Well, under the state's law, you would deduct any subsidy or program regardless of whether or not it is a voucher for housing or if it's, say, SNAP benefits. So it all gets deducted from the total,
SNAP
or added to your total income, I should say.
Oh, it
So-
all gets added
so
to
it
total
all gets added to your total income, and for example, if you have to make 3 times as much, that's a standard for the area, then that is an allowed criteria.
Okay,
So it's slightly different. It's the same result and number. It's just different means of how you get there through the
Okay.
formula.
okay. And if, I think that one of, we talked about how the city could use its power to help enforce this, but I would also add to that, we could use our channels to help educate people as well, because I think there's a lot of landlords that might get a little bit lost in exactly what they're supposed to do, but I know people want to do the right thing, so, good, okay.
Mr. Perez? Done.
you keep talking and I get more questions.
Hey, I'm glad we're not done in 5 minutes. So,
Well, this is important, and so being a neophyte when it comes to the rental and this, Section 8 vouchers and other payments. So when we take in the source of income, if the rent, let's say the rent is 2,000 a month. I think that's a fairly common number in this day and age. And if the source of income that person has from unemployment or something, or whatever it is 500 a month, they still have to then show how they're gonna get the other 1,500.
That's exactly right.
And like in a Section 8 voucher, if they only get 1,200, they still have to come up with the other 800, and the landlord still has the right to verify that they have that money coming in.
That's correct.
And I guess, this, been reading in the paper lately about all the housing things, and they're saying that basically you should, whatever the income is, if you're paying rent, you gotta figure about 30% of your salary is what you can afford for rent. So that,
Yeah, right.
and I guess the other question to all this, which makes it very easy to pass this, is that once that state law passes, everybody has to comply with it. So basically what we're doing is adopting the state law by reference and adding the fact, or do we need to add the fact that our we have code compliance?
That exists in code today, so we don't have to change those.
So we don't
enforcement
need to change that.
provisions.
So basically what we're doing is adopting state law by reference.
And then we may enforce it through our own
And then
civil
we'll
fines if
enforce
we
it
choose
through
to.
our own code enforcement or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? All right, well, I have signed the committee report, and I promise you, this will probably be the last time, unless something else happens, that we have to bring this in front of the committee of the whole. If there are no other questions, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Longer than that. Just